Well, the situation has indeed calmed down. What's going to happen either later today or over the weekend, let alone in the coming days, is not clear, of course, and will transpire. But violent anti immigration riots during the past week in England and Northern Ireland have resulted now in 700 arrests. So that figure, which went from about 400 to 500, has now gone steeply up. So arrests are continuing already as police forces around. Of course, these riots have been across England and in Belfast in Northern Ireland. I understand that some 200 people have been charged, but British police, to answer your question, are on high alert this weekend because there are concerns over more disorder breaking out, and police are very much braced for potential violence. So in Newcastle, for example, we've got, on the one hand, far-right protesters who've been gathering, but a much smaller crowd than we've seen previously. I understand up to about 100 gathered for the, quote, enough is enough protest in Newcastle. Some were waving Union Jack and England flags. At least I understand 3 far-right protesters have been detained by police in Newcastle. One, I understand, had a hammer in his possession, which was confiscated by officers before he was then placed in handcuffs. And police are searching every person who tries to join either the far-right protesters or are also counter protesters now, and they're obviously trying to keep those two groups separate. So the anti-racism protests are also planned across the country, as we've seen largely over the last few days. And as we begin to see those first counter protests, I understand at least one person has been arrested in Newcastle for snatching a microphone from another counter protester. So we will watch over the coming hours. One of the big concerns and the reason for clear police presence is the fact that there are Premier League football matches that are starting again today.
Now, as you mentioned, arrests have been made, jail sentences have been delivered related to the riots. But there's a lot of tension, as you mentioned. Is the government taking firm action quickly enough?
Well, certainly the police are on high alert, and that is because the Prime Minister, remember actually, he's former director of public prosecution. Indeed, he was that. He had that role back in 2011 when there were protests of a different nature back then. But what Prime Minister is saying himself, and it seems that the police agree with this, what we've seen on the one hand is already 200 people charged, more and more people going through the courts with what Keir Starmer has underlined as swift justice. Rather than waiting a number of weeks, months, or more, what is happening is that people that were protesting and were arrested, committing various or charged with various offences, are going through courts already. So within days of these charges, them being charged, and some are getting 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years. And they're not being given bail. They're being remanded in custody immediately. And that, it would seem, and certainly the Prime Minister believes and others believe, this is acting as a big deterrent. Interestingly, we've had the French President Emmanuel Macron speaking to Keir Starmer on the phone, and amongst the subjects, the French President expressed, of course, his condolences for the victims of that fatal knife attack that killed 3 young girls and injured others. And Mr. Macron also firmly condemned the violence and disorder that followed this attack and gave his full support to the UKPM in this context. So we'll watch, we'll wait, and we'll see what happens next.